From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the menu. Moment of truth. Theresa May is in town, desperate to keep her Brexit vision alive with a little hope of a deal. Medvedev exclusive. Russia's prime minister responds to what he calls anti-Russia hysteria in an exclusive interview. Paid for by. Facebook reveals who paid for political ads in the UK to fight election interference. Oh, Cannabis. Canada becomes the second and largest country to legalize marijuana and starts eyeing Europe. And La Résistance. In tonight's Raw Moment, France's Jean-Luc Mélenchon takes on the police during a corruption raid. All right, it's time to meet our panel for tonight. We have Ryan Heath. He's the political editor at Politico Europe. Ryan, which of these stories are you looking at closely?
I'm picking Jean-Luc Mélenchon to have this attitude coming out of a left-winger. It's exposing, really, people who say that they speak on behalf of all of the people. You speak on behalf of your views and the people you can rally behind them. But to state that you are the Republic of France when you are not elected really to any high office, that's the height of arrogance.
Indeed, really interesting behavior there. And we also have tonight Anna Maria Corazza-Bildt. She's an MEP from Sweden and is with the European People's Party. Which of these stories interests you most?
I pick a Brexit because that's making or break it week. If we will really have an exit agreement, and I hope really we do, because a hard Brexit would be a disaster for the people of Great Britain, but also for us.
Right. A lot to talk about when it comes to Brexit, definitely. And also joining us is Alan Smith. He's a Scottish MEP with the European Free Alliance and is also a member of the Scottish National Party. What about you, Alan? Which of these stories you like?
Well, I'm not choosing Brexit because Scotland voted against Brexit. We voted for Europe, so that's my instruction. This is one week of many, and this is not going to be the end of the story, I'm quite sure. I think the Facebook story is actually more significant in that that explains how Brexit happened, and it explains how people got the information that they got. There was an incredible lack of transparency in the Brexit vote and the Leave campaign.
Some would argue that there are other reasons for that, but indeed, an interesting discussion to have.
Not the single reason, but one amongst many.
We will get into that. And a lot more stories. OK, let's start with the biggest story of today first. All eyes on Theresa May. Tonight, the UK Prime Minister will make her Brexit pitch to European leaders amid diminished expectations for a deal. Now, ahead of the summit in Brussels tonight, fake Theresa May and fake Boris Johnson were in town with a message for those back home. But the EU says it's now up to the UK to bring new ideas to the table. Yesterday, Council President Donald Tusk said a no-deal Brexit is now more likely than ever, unless Theresa May comes armed with some creative proposals to win over the bloc.
The problem is clear. It's still the Irish question and the problem of the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland and so-called backstop. It looks like a new version of the Gordian knot. Unfortunately, I can't see a new version of Alexander the Great, as you know.
OK, the Gordian knot there. It's something that's impossible to untangle unless there's a creative solution or a loophole, basically. All right, who is going to be Alexander the Great? Any ideas? Let's start with you. Is there one in this situation?
Anna Maria the Great. There we go. you could do it.
I wish I could do something more than what I tried to do as member of the European Parliament and the EPP working group on Brexit. We all have now, whoever is in charge, to be constructive, positive, creative together. And I'm really worried that people are locking positions. Of course, what's on the table? We have the checkers, where we are saying this is Europe a la carte, it's cherry picking. We said since day one that you cannot separate internal market for goods and services. Then you have the backstop position, where I have a lot of understanding that, for the Irish, it's really super important. They will not accept that there is anything else than a so-called seamless border because they are so integrated. But I can also understand that there's not a majority for that at the moment.
So there are so many different pieces here. So,
well, Ireland is the key now.
Absolutely.
Ireland, because there was agreement on the budget, there was agreement on citizens. At least for the exit.
Is it a solution that we can't get out of? A Gordian knot, as Tusk was saying. Can we not get out of this?
Well, solutions can be found, and this is tough from us because, of course, coming from Scotland, we're very, very close to Ireland. We're basically two countries divided by a big river, with Northern Ireland having a very specific place. I come from Glasgow, so I know Belfast really well. And this is about the peace project. This is bigger than the customs union. This is bigger than the European Union. for too long of Northern Ireland's history, people were dying over this. And the Good Friday Agreement, the Brexiters who will shout the will of the people is so important. The Good Friday Agreement was an international peace treaty endorsed north and south in referendums. And it was predicated upon we'll all be in the single market, we'll all be in the EU, we'll all be in the customs union. Any more significant a border across the island of Ireland will have a massive psychological detriment to that process. So solutions are there, and that's that the whole of the UK remains within the customs union and the single market. Now, I'd like to see us remain within the EU, but if we can't do that, let's do Norway. That answers Brexit. It also keeps the Good Friday Agreement safe.
I'm going to go to you, Ryan, in a bit. I just wanted to go now first to Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, because he's been watching developments from the EU Council headquarters. And Darren, good to see you there. Can you bring us up to date with what's happening? Because we heard that France and Germany have started thinking about and preparing for the scenario of having a no deal. What do you know?
Yeah, indeed, and that is what Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, was suggesting today, that she is stepping up what no deal would mean for her country and indeed the French as well, talking about having to draft some emergency legislation if there is no deal, talking about the potential of visas for British visitors and indeed new customs checks. So clearly there is a sense, at least, that people seem to be talking much more about no deal. But let's get the mood from at least the British press here. I'm joined by Tom Newton-Dunn. He's the political editor of the Sun newspaper. Tom, what does Theresa May tonight at this dinner? What does she need to do? What's she going to bring to the table, essentially?
Well, that's the great question. We don't know. They haven't told us what she's going to bring to it. They haven't even told us if she's going to bring anything new to the table. Remember, there was a 2.5-hour cabinet meeting in Number 10 yesterday in which the entire cabinet went through every little bit of the Irish backstop in some minutiae, which is, obsessing London now as it is obsessing Brussels. We also know absolutely nothing new was put to the cabinet in terms of, do you mind if I go to Brussels tomorrow and fly this one up the flagpole? So it strikes me as very unlikely she's going to turn up here with something brand new, having hoodwinked the cabinet. So I think she just wants to keep the show on the road. She just wants to get enough goodwill to buy herself a bit more time, to buy herself maybe a bit more wiggle room back in London to see what she can do with her party, with her cabinet, and come back next time maybe with something new.
But are we, the French and the Germans today talking about no deal? Has the prospect of no deal become a lot more likely?
No, I don't think it has at all. I'm one of those who signs up to the concept that no deal went out the window about a year ago when we had our general election in 2017 and Theresa May lost her majority. And you were left with a parliament that had a majority for almost no type of Brexit whatsoever, but a certain majority for a block to no deal. In other words, whatever she brings back from this place in a month, 2 months, 3 months' time, if it is no deal and we're walking away, Parliament will simply step in and stop her. She knows that. Everyone knows that here. I think there's going to be a lot more talk about no deal coming up, but it's essentially a bluff on everybody's side. The EU want to say it to try and put the squeezes on her. She wants to say it to put the squeezes on them, but as a reality, almost 0%.
And just very finally and very quickly, Tom, what do your readers think? What does kind of the typical Brit who buys The Sun think about how this Brexit negotiation process has gone?
You want to be honest? They're bored.
Yes, please.
They are bored, senseless by the whole thing. If you think it's bad enough for us journalists having to get into it, generally I think they tuned out some months ago. They've certainly tuned out the deals. It's not just Sun readers, it's every reader of every paper in Britain.
Are they angry with how the negotiations?
I think they're frustrated. I think they thought they voted for something that's going to happen quite quickly. They were told by some people this could happen pretty quickly and be pretty pain-free. It's not. It's incredibly painful. It's droning on. They just want to get it done, or quite frankly have any form of resolution so that the politicians they've elected can get on to talking about stuff that makes their lives better, NHS, schools, the like.
Great stuff. Tom, thank you very much. We weren't droning on, so that's a good thing. But we will be focusing on Brexit for the next couple of weeks, potentially the next couple of months. I think the suggestion here is that this really could go down to the wire in terms of when we might see a deal. It could, Tessa, be December, just before Christmas.
All right, thank you for that, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. All right, Ryan, I will go to you. It seems like everybody does want to get on with it, but Theresa May coming here with whatever she has to present on the table. Is it going to be Salzburg, the sequel? She can say whatever she wants to say, and the answer will be no, sorry.
It might be a different dinner menu, but it's going to be something similar, I think. Theresa May painted herself into a corner, and that's why we're having this political Groundhog Day over and over again, because anywhere she moves, she is going to either anger the hard Brexiteers, because they want a Brexit that the majority of Britons don't want, but she needs them because she has no parliamentary majority, or she's going to anger the DUP, and she needs them for a parliamentary majority. So the only thing that can really work is if Theresa May just runs down the clock to the last possible minute, probably something like a December summit, and then give the absolute minimum possible time for some of those disruptive forces to undo her. And anything else is going to lead to her being thrown out of office. And then we go back to a new Groundhog Day and we go over and over and over again, but with a new face.
Do we agree with the political editor of The Sun, where we could just call everybody's bluff, everybody talking about no deal, no deal, no, actually, no, there will be a deal? Is that your feeling?
Well, I think I see Michel Barnier, who is our chief negotiator, he's calm, cool and collected. And I see that we're really trying to have the most constructive. There's a will in the European Union to reach a deal, for sure. A deal that is for the benefit also very much of the people of Great Britain, of the coming generation, of those who are now part of the European Union. Don't forget that the European Union has been shaped by the United Kingdom, by the people of the United Kingdom, and they are our friends.
But we'll have to do some fudging to get to that deal, won't we?
Exactly. And I hope that this rhetoric that we keep hearing, you know, about Brussels punishing, humiliating, they don't even let us leave and all of this, really, I hope that the people understand that it's not true.
But I hope
we are really trying. We are really trying.
It's just putting
and it's time to leave the rhetoric aside and really look at the consequences. You know, trucks in Calais and in Dover who just can't move forward. The supply chains being disrupted, shelves in the shops empty. This is not terrorizing. This is a reality. I was talking a lot this past day with business, you know, that work in Great Britain and with Great Britain. We are so integrated. They are really, really saying that's going to be a disaster.
And as you're rightly pointing out, that people will be affected by this. So let's turn to actually what the public think about, you know, what's happening in all of this. Their attitude. A new survey released by the European Parliament asked citizens if a referendum was held tomorrow regarding your country's membership in the EU, how would you vote? Now, the results were particularly interesting in the UK. First, take a look at the referendum results from 2016. 51.9% voted leave, 48.1% voted remain. Now, let's look at today. According to this new survey, only 35% would vote to leave, 53% would vote to remain, although 12% said they were unsure, which wasn't an option on the 2016 ballot. Now, take that same question EU-wide, and the answers vary. The most EU support comes from Luxembourg, where 85% would vote to remain. And on the opposite end, only 44% of Italians would want to stay in the bloc. And on average, 66% of EU citizens would vote for the country to remain in the EU. All right, I'll go to you, Alan. Is this a direct result of what people are seeing, the mess of the Brexit negotiations? They see the headache and think, OK, maybe it's not worth it to leave. Is it a direct result of that?
Well, partly, but our position in Scotland is that in the referendum we voted 62% to remain. So it's about how you have the campaign. And my party and other parties in Scotland, we had an unashamedly pro-EU campaign, pro-international solidarity in action. Now, we have a different attitude because we're a country of 5.5 million people, so we have a different place in the world. We want to interact differently. We lack the delusion of exceptionalism that does cover part of UK politics, aided and abetted by The Sun, I have to say. The Sun has a long track record in misinforming the UK's public. So we didn't have that in Scotland. But other countries are looking at this going, this just doesn't look like a good idea. And 2 years later, we still find ourselves in a dreadful situation with too many people uncertain about the future.
And I mean, I think what's interesting about this survey, I go to you, Ryan, is that, OK, majority of people, they don't want to leave the EU. But many people, majority, also said that they do want to see the direction of the EU changing. So how do you square that circle?
Well, the EU is a safety net for a lot of people. So in some countries, if you have a corrupt or poorly governed system where it doesn't have deep democratic roots, the EU is your security blanket sometimes, where you look to the EU to protect you from your own government. That's one of the benefits of EU membership. Of course, you have other countries that have older populations who remember what it was to rebuild from war. So it's another reason to want to be in the EU. But you can say you want your union and have a sensible debate and say it's not going in the right direction. We don't have to divide into this idea of if you make a criticism, you're against the EU. It's not for and against the EU. More and more people treat the EU as a reality, and then they want to debate how do they shape that reality for themselves and their country.
All right, and what about the reaction of other Europeans, the difference between, as we saw from Italy? I mean, we are seeing the sentiment really changing, especially with European elections coming. I mean, this is something that cannot be ignored.
Well, Italy's the real warning sign. I won't take everyone else's time, but you can see some red flags there. You've got the emergence of a populist government, and Italians have less faith than anyone else in their EU membership and where it's going. And so we've got to be very worried about that.
Yeah, so maybe an exit, you know, if you look at the survey, an exit is not...
Anna-Marie's Italian as well as Swedish.
Well, as well as Swedish, so yeah, you would probably have a unique perspective.
Yeah, and I'm of course following very much with great concern what's going on in Italy, and I picked up very serious standing up against the Salvinis and the Orbans that are trying to roll back the clock in Europe. And I do think that we need to do something to show the people of Italy, who has been by far the most pro-European, the founding member, etc., that basically are pro-Europeans, that have now turned in protest because they felt that Europe has abandoned them and turned their back when it gets to migration. And I do believe that we can deliver concrete results, and we have a chance even before the elections in May. I think this Eurobarometer is in any case encouraging me. You know, the media somehow give for granted that, you know, in May there's going to be a huge victory of the right. Give us a chance. You know, we are going to pick up the fight. Some of us are ready for it. We're not afraid to stand up for values, to stand up for Europe that delivers for everyone, that doesn't leave anyone behind, that brings concrete results, that makes people dream, that gives a vision for the future.
It's something, yeah.
That a family that gives you security, that gives you peace, stability, and economic growth and jobs.
We'll change gears a little bit, because we have a lot of leaders in town, a lot of meetings, and because of that, a lot of food. Well, as you've said, EU leaders will sit down tonight to dinner, but Theresa May won't be there. And as has been widely reported, she's not invited to that dinner. And strangely enough, it's not the first time that food has threatened to overshadow these negotiations. Let's take a look. They called it the Pizza Summit. Members of May's cabinet met for a pizza party on Monday evening. And while May was not there, concerns over her Brexit strategy were definitely on the menu. It's not the first time food has taken center stage.
As you mentioned briefly, the dinner you had with Mrs. May. Publicly, it was a good dinner. Privately, I heard it wasn't quite so good. And do you expect...
You mean the quality of the food, or...? Privately, everything went well, but in fact, we have a problem, because the British want to leave the European Union, and it's not feasible. But it was excellent. I'm not talking about the food.
Or what about when a Brexit-dominated summit made Angela Merkel hungry for a famed Brussels frites shop? Or when Council President Donald Tusk posted this photo of Theresa May and a not-so-subtle caption, "Sorry, no cherries." What is this with the obsession with food? Anybody want to comment on that?
Food is important.
You're from Modena. It's the center of gastronomy in Italy. That's how we come together. That's how we make connections and relationships.
Food, absolutely.
And not being invited to dinner, you know, it's such a big deal.
Food,
here, it says a lot, right?
Food brings people together.
But do we care what they eat? I don't care what they eat. It's about what they're talking about.
That's the real sad thing
table.
about where the UK is right now. The UK is literally not at the table, not part of the family.
Well, there you go.
That's a tragedy. I'm really sad.
All right.
I hope you'll be back.
We have a lot more coming up on Raw Politics. Anti-Russia hysteria. Well, those are the words of Russia's Prime Minister in our exclusive interview about European sanctions, Donald Trump, and alleged poisonings. And also, Canada becomes the second country in the world to legalize marijuana and starts eyeing Europe for new markets. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, lots of world leaders are in Brussels this week, including the Russian Prime Minister. He is set to meet Germany's Angela Merkel and the EU's Jean-Claude Juncker on the sidelines of the Asia-Europe meeting. Now, yesterday, I spoke to Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev in Moscow in a wide-ranging exclusive interview for Euronews' Global Conversation, and he was quite vocal about what he calls anti-Russian hysteria and the futility of sanctions. But he was much more muted when it came to this Skripal affair. Here's a sneak peek.
Текущая ситуация во взаимоотношениях между Россией и Европейским Союзом, ну, что скрывать, эти отношения переживают не лучшие времена. Мы считаем, что это результат тех достаточно скоропалительных решений, которые были приняты самим Европейским Союзом. И, как мне кажется, расплачиваются за эти решения, еще раз подчеркиваю, не мы были их инициаторами, те, кто живет в Европейском Союзе. Естественно, это оказывает негативное влияние и на нашу страну.
I'm sure you've been asked this many times, the Skripal poisoning. The defense given by the two suspects were mocked. Are you embarrassed by that reaction? Do you think it damaged Russia's credibility?
Понимаете, вообще любые оценки такого порядка, они точно не способствуют международному сотрудничеству. Я вспоминаю советский период, когда Советский Союз тоже вешал ярлыки, клеймил международную систему капитала, говорил о том, значит, что нас разделяет, но ни к чему хорошему это не вело. Мы еще сегодня не говорили про наших друзей за океаном, например, про вот эту антироссийскую истерию, которая существует в Соединенных Штатах Америки. Мы же прекрасно понимаем, что все, что связано с Россией сейчас в Соединенных Штатах Америки, преследует другую цель. Это внутриполитические разборки. По сути, разборки между республиканцами и демократами, разборки внутри республиканской партии. То же самое, я почему об этом говорю, касается европейских стран. Значит, вот эта антироссийская кампания, она в 90% из 100 преследует абсолютно внутриполитические цели. Сохраниться у власти, сформировать правительство, добиться еще каких-то результатов, но уж точно не, так сказать, повлиять на позицию России. На нее повлиять невозможно, все это прекрасно понимают.
I want to really ask you about the defense given by the Skripal suspects, just because I want to know whether you really believe that they went there to see a cathedral.
Я не знаю, я комментировать не буду, просто потому что я не знаком ни с этими людьми, ни с этими комментариями, в достаточной степени не знаком. Я не знаю, откуда я знаю.
Okay, so does Russia see itself at war with America or anyone who imposes sanctions on the country?
Санкции абсолютно непродуктивная история. Санкции в отношении банковского сектора – это действительно объявление торговой войны, это наиболее тяжелые санкции. Нет никаких сомнений, что мы подобного рода давление сможем преодолеть. У нас нет никаких сомнений, что наша экономика способна адаптироваться к любым формам давления. Вопрос только в том, зачем это надо. Вопрос именно в том, что это разрушает международный порядок, в том числе международный экономический порядок. Степень интегрированности, взаимововлеченности российской и американской экономики очень незначительная. От того, что американцы объявляют санкции в отношении, допустим, нашей страны, американский бизнес не очень сильно страдает. Именно потому, что у нас небольшой объем торгового оборота. Но европейский бизнес страдает очень сильно, потому что у нас огромный объем торгового оборота. Торговый оборот с Соединенными Штатами Америки приблизительно сейчас, это плохой период, около 20 миллиардов долларов. Это ничто. 45% нашего торгового оборота приходится на Европейский Союз. Это сотни миллиардов евро. Возникает вопрос, что на этом потеряла Европа? А потеряла она рабочие места, потеряла она прибыль, потеряла уверенность.
Is Donald Trump the best thing that happened to Russia in recent times?
Ну, Дональда Трампа не мы выбирали. Его, с одной стороны, подозревают в каких-то симпатиях к нашей стране, хотя, собственно говоря, он ничего с точки зрения такого радикального улучшения отношений между нашими странами пока не сделал.
Right, and just to bring up that in that interview, what you didn't see is a reaction to the attack being reported now in Crimea that was pre-taped yesterday, and the Office of the Prime Minister said they're sending their condolences to the families of those affected. All right, let's discuss what he actually said. Back with us in the studio is Politico's political editor Ryan Heath, the Swedish MEP with the EPP group Anna Maria Corazza-Bildt, and joining us is our correspondent from Euronews, the Russian service, Andrei Bekatov. All right, he said a lot in that clip. Is there, maybe I'll start with you, is that the view in Russia? Is there Russian, anti-Russian hysteria? You're living here in Europe, you see what the Europeans see as Russia doing and seen as Russian aggression. Is there anti-Russia hysteria?
I think the Russian media is reporting anti-Russia hysteria with a bit of excitement, because it means for them that Russia is treated as a really powerful, big, almost superpower. Even if it's America, it means that we are on the same level with the States. So in a way, it boost their pride. In the same way that, Russia is obsessed with celebrating victory in the Second World War, because look, we beat Germans themselves, so we're really powerful. So again, I think they're suffering from a loss of prestige as a superpower, as the Soviet Union, and now they're back on the stage, on the front row. So in a way, they're happy to report that, although, of course, it hurts their pride as well, because they said, no, we haven't done enough to deserve this bad treatment.
All right. One thing that how Europe has been responding is through sanctions. So sanctions, Dmitry Medvedev was saying that regardless of how many sanctions are imposed, it won't change the position of Russia. So it's useless.
Well, let me say first that the Russian people are our friends. We reach out to them. It's a great nation, a great people. The problem is in the Kremlin. And it's the Russian people that are the first one to suffer of this regime. If the sanctions are so futile and terrible as the Prime Minister says, they could start by lifting the sanctions that Russia is imposing to Europe, because these are the sanctions that are hitting our company, not the ones that we put. We have soft powers in the European Union. We are not a military superpower. It's our economic power. And it's a way to tell the Russian Kremlin, come back to the international community, come back to us. You're a member of the United Nations, member of the G8, respect international law. But the aggression against Donbass and Luhansk in Ukraine, with involvement of Russian military, the annexation of Crimea, an integral part of Ukraine, these are facts. So, here we have this propaganda machinery where I'm sorry that Prime Minister is part of defying and attacking Europe. On the other side, you have with Skripal, with Ukraine and so on, hard facts. With the fake news, with the attacks against our election. This is evidence that we have that Russia is acting in a way that is hostile to the European Union, dividing us, destabilizing us, and trying to disunite us. Yeah, and of course, sanctions is the minimum we can do.
When I presented all those, that Europe is accusing Russia of, and with the evidence that the Europe intelligence services have, he said, I'm not going to Brussels to meet my counterparts to be judged. We are not here to be judged. So what does that say about
No, we're not judging, we're defending us from attacks.
Right, I mean, from him saying that and coming here, what's the potential then to move forward?
Well, in his own words, there's no potential because Russia can't be influenced. So what do you do in that situation? You have to stick to your own values. The Prime Minister spoke about the importance of international cooperation, but that has to be grounded in something. That has to be grounded in values, not in invading neighboring countries, not in setting up troll farms to disrupt other people's elections, not in murdering the civilians of other countries. And he talked about costs. Well, what is the relative cost? Yes, there's a cost to sanctions, but it's a much greater cost if a country feels that it's going to be invaded or any such invasion would actually occur
so obviously,
on European territory.
This is viewed differently in Russia, obviously, that none of this is accepted. No,
sanctions work both ways because they're targeted at oligarchs, at strategic sectors of the economy. Exactly. But when they're not supposed to hurt ordinary people in Europe or in Russia. But
they Medvedev, are, aren't they?
Yes, but when Medvedev talk about them hurting people, he talks about Russian counter-sanctions, the embargo, in particular, embargo on food imports.
Exactly.
I've just been to Russia and I met cheesemakers, and they produce their own Parmigiani, and they're so proud. They said, we're busting sanctions. But in a way, they're busting counter-sanctions.
Right. That is very important.
But that means that this stimulates the Russian economy in a very bizarre way because they'll produce their own. The same with financial sanctions. Russians are worried to keep their accounts abroad, so they repatriate the capital, which is good for the economy.
So it's very important to tell to the Italian people, for instance, because you mentioned Parmesan, I come from a family that produced Parmesan cheese, that it is the sanctions imposed by Russia that are hitting Italian producers, not the European sanctions.
All right, there's a lot more in that interview, actually, because the Russian Prime Minister had a lot more to say on the topic. From Syria to the unrest at home, which we had brought up with him, and you can watch that on Global Conversations tomorrow at 12:30 on Euronews. All right, we've seen a lot of finger-pointing by governments. We're talking about cyber attacks, election interference, but what are the tech companies themselves doing to stop it? Well, Facebook is hoping to end foreign meddling in the UK as the company announced it will now disclose who's paid for political ads and how much. Alex from theCUBE has been looking into this. Alex.
Yes, Tessa, who is behind what you see in your newsfeed? That has been a very contentious and very important discussion that people have been having. Well, now Facebook have unveiled a raft of new measures in the UK, which they say are going to improve transparency. Let me break them down for you. First of all, there's this new feature called Paid for By. In the past, you would not necessarily have known who was funding an advert. Now, in the UK, if you want to make a post and pay for that post about a political party, a political figure, or a referendum, even a past referendum, you need to disclose it to Facebook, verify your location and identity, and carry a paid-for-by disclaimer. This is all going to be saved in an ad library. These ads will be browsable for up to 7 years, and all of it is to make sure elections and the democratic process is free from external interference in particular countries. So what does this look like if you're a Facebook user? As I say, these changes at the moment being introduced in the UK, but let me show you here. First of all, you will get a disclaimer at the top, paid for by, in this case the made-up XYZ party, and then this, you can push an I button, which allows you to open this up in the newly created ad library, which will then show you exactly who's paid for it from your newsfeed. It will tell you here, paid for by the XYZ party, when the advert started running, and then finally, it'll show you not just when it started running, but how much was paid. In this case, up to £5,000 were paid for this made-up advert, and then a breakdown of who this advert is targeted at, who's seeing the most of it. Why is Facebook doing this? Well, they say it's all about improving transparency, and this, their statement saying, we are up against smart and well-funded adversaries, who change their tactics as we spot abuse. But we believe this higher level of transparency is good for democracy and good for the electoral process as a whole. It's yet to be seen, of course, if these measures will be rolled out across the world, and with the US midterms coming up and EU elections in 2019, Tessa, I'm sure a lot of people will be looking at how this goes down in the UK.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and theCUBE. Ryan, what do you think? Is this the right way to go about addressing the problem?
I'm going to be a massive devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Great that this is happening in the US and UK. It's a step forward. But the UK isn't having an election next year. So what's the value of it next year when you've got 27 countries literally a few kilometers away who are having elections? I think Facebook's doing it because it's the cheaper, easier thing for them to do because they know the UK and they know the English language. It's very hard to spread it, but that's what you've got to do. The other option would be we just don't take ads from anyone politically. Of course, that would be an income stream that's been cut off to Facebook. So that might be one reason why they're not willing to do that. So
right, but if it were rolled out, it will be a good idea.
And we're political leaders as well. Legislatures need to come forward with regulation that ensures the integrity of the election process. It is sometimes unfair that these platforms have to figure it out for themselves.
Right. Very interesting. I'm sure we will have more on that topic in future shows. Well, now, we'll take a short break. Canada's cannabis gamble is coming up next. Will legalized marijuana hit the country's image while lining its coffers? And could Europe one day follow? That's after the break. Celebrations there, the first purchase of legal marijuana in Canada after the country became just the second in the world after Uruguay to legalize recreational use of cannabis. Now, at midnight last night, people queued up outside some private and mostly government-run stores. Canada is now the only G20 nation with legal marijuana, with the world's largest marijuana marketplace and a huge tax windfall. Now, the government predicts it will rake in 267 million euros a year. All right, to discuss this, I'm joined by Ryan Heath, with us still, political editor at Politico Europe, Luke Flanagan, an Irish MEP with a group of the European United Left, and Alexandria Hicks. She's a political strategist and communications consultant with Fleischmann Hillard, who specializes in crisis management. All right, let's talk about the image, first of all, that I'll go to Alexandria, that this brings. Is this a risk to Canada's image, or is it actually ahead of the curve? This is where everyone is going to be going.
I don't think there's a risk to Canada's image in any way, shape or form. Like, I think, as time goes on, people are more and more comfortable with cannabis use, and I think there's very strong arguments, and there's serious health risks associated with cannabis use, but there's also therapeutic benefits that are associated with cannabis use. And I think most people can see both sides of this. So I don't think there's a risk to Canada's reputation at all.
All right, when we look at Europe, for example, because Canada is eyeing Europe, it's going to be a massive market for cannabis. If we look at Europe, what do you think the direction Europe is going to be taking with regard to legalizing? We have Portugal and the Netherlands that decriminalize marijuana, but what about legalizing?
Well, who knows, but I think it's a massive day. I've been someone who's campaigned to legalise cannabis now for about 25 years. I was the first person in the whole of the European Union to put a bill before our Parliament. It got defeated, but you asked the question, would it damage Canada's image? No, I would say it would embellish Canada's image, because it shows it up as being a sensible country that doesn't want to put hundreds of millions of Canadian dollars into the hands of criminals and wants to put it back into the tax net and into schools and into hospitals and make cannabis safer.
And do you think Europe has the same sensibility? I think there might be a disconnect with the views of how Europe would perceive this or pursue this in Canada.
Well, if you look at opinion polls from around Europe, from the United Kingdom, from the Republic of Ireland, there's a poll running today on thejournal.ie, and it's running at about 65% in favour. If you look at the Netherlands, you look at the fact that personal use in Belgium is basically decriminalised. I think it isn't much of a leap to move from a situation where it's tolerated and where the money is going to criminals to a situation where the money then goes to our health service instead.
Right. I'll give you a quick word on this, Ryan.
One of the problems with these issues is sometimes the evidence base. So there's a lot of countries that will be looking to Canada as the guinea pig. And depending on how it goes in Canada, they might make the same sort of leap. They don't have to leap into the dark in the way that Canadians might feel that they're doing. And also, this issue brings sometimes some complications.
But it's a massive market. I mean, Europe, it should be, it's tempting,
we talk
isn't
about tax loopholes and the need to fund our budgets. When you legalise products like this, what you're doing is creating a safer place for those transactions to occur. They occur anyway. So shouldn't they occur in ways that allow us to fund our schools and our hospitals?
Yeah, the only thing that's changing is it will now be legal to do it. People are already doing it. And there's another thing that will change from an economy point of view. The Republic of Ireland has close on 100,000 people who have a criminal record for possession of cannabis. If that record was expunged, it would free them to be far, far more economically productive, to work in jobs that they currently can't work in now, and that would be the same for Canada. And they are talking about a pardon, which is fantastic news.
All right, it is a big day, and lots of debates for sure will come out of this, especially in the European setting. All right, but we have to move on now to France, where it appears that President Emmanuel Macron has been doing some soul searching. He announces a cabinet reshuffle, and it's in tonight's Power Play. He left everyone hanging for 2 weeks since the resignation of Interior Minister Gérard Collomb. Now, after several delays, Macron has broken his silence and introduced a new cabinet. Christophe Castaner, the head of Macron's En Marche party, is the new Interior Minister. But it was Macron's self-critical tone that stole the spotlight.
Ces derniers mois ont en effet pu rendre moins perceptible ce sens. D'abord, parce que parfois, par ma détermination ou mon parler vrai, j'ai pu déranger ou choquer certains. Et j'entends les critiques.
Macron is seeking to reassure the French people that everything is under control after his presidency has been rocked in recent months by scandals and a string of resignations. That's crisis management right there, isn't it? Is that what he's doing?
Trying to, yeah, trying
Unsuccessfully?
to. Look, I think we've got to remember that this is, well, I mean, he is in plummeting polls, and he's had a disastrous 6 months, particularly disastrous 3 months, and this reshuffle was not of his own design, it was ministerial resignation, so this wasn't his choice. And he's, what he was trying to do yesterday in terms of the announcement and in terms of the staging of it was clearly an attempt.
And being self-critical, because he's portrayed as being arrogant. I mean, he was called arrogant.
The whole setup of it, being self-critical, the staging of it, everything was very clearly designed to arrest the plummet and to stop the downfall and change the tone and take back control.
And do you think he was trying to show he really was reflecting and taking time, or was it that no one was picking up the phone and accepting his offer of these jobs?
Well, it would appear that obviously I'm not in there, but it would appear that, this has been talked about in French political circles and in the media for 2 weeks. And the fact that it's dragged on for 2 weeks and the fact that it appears to have been a disagreement between him and the Prime Minister has sucked all of the momentum out of any reshuffle and any bounce that he would have got.
I'll throw the question at you. What do you think?
I think he might have had some difficulty getting people to pick up the phone, but he's not without guts. He put a very radical choice into the Environment Ministry, a woman who has existed as a lobbyist. So as someone who does lobbying, I want to hear your view as well, Alex, into a job that was vacated by a man who said lobbyists have taken control of the government. So if you're willing to do that, you're not listening to everybody, are you? You are ploughing on through.
I'm going to go to you. All right.
But to say that it isn't by his own design, I think is incorrect.
I'll go to you. I'll go to you afterwards because there's something else you'd like to talk about tonight. Because we have our raw moment. It comes to us still from France, where Jean-Luc Mélenchon responded angrily this week when police raided his home and offices over allegations of misuse of EU funds. Let's take a look.
On va voir si on va m'empêcher d'entrer dans mon local. On n'est pas des voyous, on n'est pas des bandits. C'est pas de la police que vous êtes en train de faire. Je fais ce que je veux, monsieur. Vous ne touchez pas, vous ne touchez pas. Au nom de quoi vous m'empêchez d'entrer dans mon local? Au nom de quoi? Qui vous a donné cet ordre? Je suis un parlementaire.
Touchez pas, monsieur Mélenchon.
Vous ne me touchez pas.
Ne touchez pas.
C'est vous qui me touchez. Non, je ne vous touche pas. Elle craque. Allez, on va voir qui va avoir le dernier mot ici.
Luke, I'll give you the last word. What do you think? That kind of reaction.
you were on about has he it under control? Well, it seems that some people will go to will stop at nothing to take control. There was a case against Macron in February where electoral irregularities were shown up, which even suggested possible criminality. Was his house raided at 7 o'clock in the morning? I think this is a dire situation to see in European politics because it sends out the message. It sends out the message that politics isn't the only thing that decides who runs a country, and that's what should be the only thing. Democracy.
Well, on that note, we'll have to end the show here. Thank you for joining us tonight, and do join us again tomorrow, same time, same place.